Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Dean Alex Leinikoff of the Law School and Interim Dean Bill Gormley at the Georgetown Public Policy, we'd like to welcome you to our election symposium, Decision 08. We are happy to welcome our friends and students at GPPI who are here at the law school. Welcome to all of you. And we are delighted to be joined with the Public Policy Institute to present this. So thank you, Bill, and thank you all for coming tonight. It's a special treat to welcome back Charles Krauthammer and E.J. Dionne, who were with us last spring. Thank you both. You've become veterans of our panels. And for Clarence Page and Byron York, we hope you will come back and see us too. We are grateful that you are here, and I think Wolf would agree that this is the best political team of any law school in the country. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Wolf Blitzer. Wolf Blitzer is the anchor of CNN's Wolf Blitzer Reports, late edition with Wolf Blitzer, The Situation Room, and is the former co-anchor of The World Today. Wolf began his career in 1972 with the Reuters news agency in Tel Aviv. Shortly thereafter, he became a Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. He joined CNN in 1990 as the network's military affairs correspondent at the Pentagon. He has won numerous awards, including the 2003 Daniel Pearl Award from the Chicago Press Veterans Association, the American Veteran Awards Ernie Pyle Journalism Award for Excellence in Military Reporting, and the Anti-Defamation League's Hubert H. Humphrey First Amendment Freedoms Prize, the International Platform Association's Lowell Thomas Broadcast Journalism Award for outstanding contributions to journalism. Wolf is the author of two books, Between Washington and Jerusalem, A Reporter's Notebook, and Territory of Lies. He has also written articles for numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Los Angeles Times. It's almost impossible to describe our gratitude for Wolf, who is, as all of these people are, welcome, Celinda Lake, welcome, to thank Wolf enough. These are extremely busy this time of year, dealing with an extremely important time in our history. And every time we ask Wolf, he always says yes. This is his 8th symposium here, and while last year I said one more he would get his degree from Georgetown, one more time and he will be on our faculty. And two more, perhaps the dean of the law school. So it is my great pleasure to thank you all and welcome you all, and an even greater pleasure to welcome my friend, Wolf Blitzer.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much for that. And Dean, thank you. Thanks to all the students for showing up. It's great to see so many young people. Wow, a lot of people here. I hope all of you are in awe of what is about to happen, because this is very exciting. And Celinda Lake is here. We're thrilled that she's here. She's one of the leading pollsters in Washington, and we're going to start with her in a moment. But let me just tell you, it's been a pretty exciting day for me so far today, and the day is still young. Could be pretty exciting over the next hour or so as well. But I started off the day this morning in Manchester, New Hampshire, because I interviewed John McCain at 10:30 in the morning. We had a nice, long, extensive interview, which obviously you all saw in the Situation Room. Is that right? Of course you did. While you're not studying, and it was really great, because I saw John McCain, did this interview, got on a plane from Manchester to Washington, and there I was back on television within a matter of only a few hours. It's part of the business of being a journalist. So for those of you who are going to law school and decide at some point down the road, you know what, I don't want to work for one of these law firms or do that legal stuff, journalism. Think about it. It's a good career. You could have a lot of fun. You get paid to ask questions and to learn what you're probably interested in learning about anyhow. Because I always tell my friends and associates, even if I had listened to my parents' advice and gone to law school, I probably would have still been interested in politics and foreign policy, all sorts of other news of the day, but I sort of fell into journalism, as all of our colleagues here basically did. And once you get into it, it's hard to really get out, because it's a great way to combine your personal excitement, personal interest, and actually make a living in the process doing it. So it's something you should think about. If once you finish law school, go ahead and finish law school. You're here. You're working hard. You might as well take advantage of all of that. Let's talk about the election, which is only 13 days away. It's, I know, trust me. Spent the last 2 years watching this election unfold. And this morning I reminded John McCain, it was in early June of last year, 2007, when I was moderating a Republican presidential debate in Manchester, New Hampshire, outside of Manchester at St. Anselm College, and there were 10 Republican presidential wannabes on the stage. And at that point, you know, he was really doing horribly. He was his poll numbers were terrible. You know, Mitt Romney and Rudy Giuliani. You know, they were really struck. Fred Thompson. You know, there were all sorts of great potential Republican candidates out there. And John McCain's career had basically ended. All the pundits thought it was over for him, except for John McCain. And he fought and fought and fought, and he came back. And he reminded me today, you know what? Still got 13 days, so it's not over with yet. And he's determined to fight. But let's. We got a Republican here. All right, let's from Celinda. Celinda Lake has done a lot of polling over the years, and she's done most of her polling for Democrats, but she's going to put on her nonpartisan hat right now and basically give us a little overview of where this election stands on this day. And as we like to say when we do all these polls, these are snapshots, and they can change, and they often and almost always do.
There you go. And they change day to day. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And I, too, was early admissions to law school and then got into polling. I found data. So if you decide not to be the journalist and not to be the lawyer, if you're a recovering lawyer, you can be a pollster. And I want to thank so much. It's a very august panel that I'm up here with. I feel very humbled by it. Let me say that despite John McCain's predictions and his stamina, and he is getting a higher proportion of the vote in the public than he is in this room, but it does look like Barack Obama will win, although the margin, of course, is still not a done deal. But this is a change electorate. It is an electorate where voters solidly believe the country is going in the wrong direction. And even now, 2/3 of Republicans think the country is going in the wrong direction. And I often say that it's not just the economy stupid, but as the head of the AFL-CIO said, it's the economy moron. And 60% of the voters now pick the economy as the number one issue. At the height of the 1992 victory for Clinton, and at the highest concern about the economy was not more than 45%. So the economy is dominating, and I believe that Lehman Brothers actually did for the Democrats, which we were having a hard time doing for ourselves, which was to solidify this victory. You now have a situation where Barack Obama is solidly ahead on the economy, where voters believe that John McCain is actually the riskier leader than Barack Obama, in part because they worry that he may still bring forward some of the policies of Bush and continue some of those economic policies. You are seeing the race close in some of the polls a little bit right now, and it's because the traditional gender dynamics are emerging, where men are voting Republican, women are voting Democratic. Women closed for a few days around Sarah Palin, and what they saw in the ticket generally, but they've returned very, very solidly to the Democratic fold now. And of course, the key is whichever side wins women, really. If Republicans narrow the margin among women, as they did in 2004, then they win because of their base among men. If Democrats keep women very, very enthusiastic for them as they are right now, then Democrats win, and that's the whole formula. Barack Obama has the ability to change the electorate. Democrats always talk about changing the contours of the electorate. It very rarely happens, but this time it actually looks like it might. And young voters are voting in record numbers. They voted in record numbers in the primary. They support Barack Obama now, depending on the poll, by anywhere from a net 24 to a net 34 points. And they while the rest of the electorate is about 8 points more favorable toward Barack Obama. So young people are really going to deliver this revolution. They delivered it in the primary, they delivered it in the general election. But having said that, the real question is not whether young people will turn out in record numbers. I believe they will. The real question is how far they're going to vote down the ticket. And of the surge voters for Barack Obama, about a third say that they will not vote for Senate or Congress. Now, everybody always lies like banshees about whether they're going to vote or not. So for people to feel that strongly that they don't even bother lying about it, we should take very seriously. And I think one of the struggles here for the Democrats is to make sure that the change vote goes all the way down the ticket.
I'm going to interrupt for a moment because we're going to get to we got a lot of people. Great. That's my job, to make sure that we got a good taste of where Celinda thinks this race stands, basically, and I'll paraphrase it in a word or two. She basically thinks it's over. And let me bring everyone back a little bit to a sense of reality. I'll have Charles Krauthammer weigh in because, as all of us know who have been covering politics for a long time, the Democrats are fully capable of messing things up. And so Charles, is it over?
Yes.
Here I am trying to get some people interested in the subject.
I now defer to EJ. No, even Democrats that can't blow at this election. They'll try, and they're very good at it, but even this time. And I do agree with Celinda. I think the key event of this election, when the history is written, will be the day or the night that Paulson allowed Lehman to go under. Because up until then, there was a sense that, if not, there was consistency that you had an administration that was looking at the crisis and had some idea of how to rescue. And then all of a sudden, after rescuing Bear, rescuing Fannie and Freddie, rescuing AIG, Lehman went, and that was a shock. The reason it was a shock is that either saving Bear was right or letting Lehman go was right, but they can't both be right. So there was a sense that they were really ad hocing this. They really did not have a handle on it, and confidence totally evaporated. The second event, I think, was the failure of the House to pass the first rescue package, which showed unseriousness in the Congress, particularly among the House Republicans, who came around because the market voted that day with a 700-point drop, which could not be ignored. But look, you could have had Reagan running in this election at his prime, and against the economic tsunami that is now going on, he wouldn't have a chance. Remember, the race before the collapse of the market was relatively even. In fact, McCain had a slight lead coming out of his convention. There was the Palin effect at the beginning. For the first couple of weeks, she was a media star and had some appeal, not only in galvanizing the base, but actually had a presumptive appeal to perhaps some of the Clinton supporters in the Midwestern, the Appalachian areas, but that later evaporated. What I was struck with today is a Fox News poll that showed that Obama with about, I think, an 8-point lead, but more interesting was the fact that Obama had the support of 88% of Democrats. That means that Democrats have come home. The question was, would the Clinton supporters come to him, and the answer now is a resounding yes. It's hard to see how that is reversed. And the reason I think that happened is that the appeal of Republicans to that constituency, to the Clinton constituency, and her appeal was sort of a social, a cultural appeal. But when your 401k is dissolving and your job is in jeopardy and the factories in town look as if they're teetering, the guns and God issue, even if you cling to gun and gods, it's less of an issue when you're overwhelmed by the economic issues. And what happened was the traditional Republican appeal to Reagan Democrats, which had made all of these states in play, all these Appalachian states in play, evaporated in the face of an economic event that's unprecedented in the last 70 years, so that the cultural and issues disappeared. In the face of that, what you're seeing is if you look at the polls in all the swing states, all the states where the battleground states, as they're called, from Ohio all the way to even west of Virginia, where Obama's pouring in a lot of money, which had been assumed only a month ago was out of reach. All of that is shifting Democratic, and that means that the mathematics of this might look as if it's almost impossible for this race to go the other way. In the absence of an act of God, and it looks as if at least this year, God is a Democrat.
Well, let me bring EJ in. EJ, what would happen in these final 13 days if what happened in 2004, only days before the election, were to happen again? And I'm referring to a videotape coming in from Osama bin Laden saying whatever he's going to say, a dramatic state. We haven't heard from him in a long time. And I think it's fair to say that in 2004, it was a very close race in Ohio and elsewhere. That videotape from bin Laden, only days before the election, certainly wound up helping George W. Bush get reelected because it reminded people of what happened on 9/11. So what would happen now if bin Laden were to suddenly make a guest appearance?
See, I think the more important factor will be when the Democrats ship John Murtha to Kathmandu without a cell phone, and that would have a major effect. First of all, I want to say it's good to be at the newly renamed Georgetown Law School with Wolf Blitzer tonight. And I also want to say it's great to be with Charles at that panel we did like this, and with my distinguished colleagues Clarence and Byron, but I particularly appreciated it in our last panel when Charles at one point said, "Much as it pains me to say so, I agree with EJ." And I carried that with me for weeks.
Yes, and the pain,
I think that this
as well.
What?
And the pain remains as well.
I had to remind him of the pain. Honestly, I don't think the effect would be enormous. There's a New York Times story today that seems to say that the chatter on Al-Qaeda says they are for McCain, whatever that means, if that interpretation is correct, and maybe they're playing a double game and there'll be negative ads about that. But I don't think the effect will be the same, partly for the reason Charles said. I mean, to me, 5 quick factors: Bush, McCain, Palin, Black September, not the PLO, Black September, and Obama. With Bush at 25%, it's very, it's unfortunate for the guy running on Bush's ticket. I think McCain made a fundamental error in not running as the more ideologically maverick. He's running as a public maverick, but he didn't run as an ideologically maverick McCain. I think that McCain had a chance. Palin was a catastrophic choice, I think, as Charles, early on among conservatives, was willing to acknowledge. Just 3 numbers. Andy Kohut's latest poll from Pew released yesterday. All voters, 32% unfavorable on Palin in September, 49% now. Women, 34 then, 54 now. Independents, 27 unfavorable then, 50% now, and swing voters 23 to 40. Palin, I think, was a consequential choice, and it was a bad one for McCain. Black September, my friend Strobe Talbot's name for the economic downturn. Charles is right about its overall effect. I think Obama did not have a crisp economic message until the crisis came along, so it had a kind of double effect. It reminded people they were unhappy, and I think it forced Obama into a much better economic message. And then lastly, Obama himself. I think 2 key things. One, the coolness and calmness that he showed ended up standing up well against, Democrats like to use the word erratic, of John McCain, his reaction to the crisis. And also, he had a strategy. Ironically, McCain in one debate said, he understands tactics but not strategy. I actually think it's the other way around. But just to keep ratings high for Wolf, I do think there is a narrow path for McCain. I think this move he made today of putting everything onto Pennsylvania is wise in PR terms and I think in substantive terms. If he could somehow take Pennsylvania away from Obama, then it becomes somewhat more complicated for Obama. Obama could then carry Colorado, Virginia, Iowa, New Mexico, and all the rest of the carry states and still fall short. I think that if McCain wins, I don't think he can win the popular vote, so God save this republic if we go through that again. I don't think this is a likely scenario. I think it is almost over, but you should keep watching Wolf Blitzer on CNN because this narrow path may be available to him.
I think you make excellent points. Byron, we're counting on you to save this discussion.
I'm not going to do it. I think, now, Celinda was talking about the various trends. You do have to look at the states, and you should just look at Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, Missouri, Iowa, Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada. And Bush won every single one of those states in 2004, and McCain would have to win all of them except he could lose one of the little bitty ones. That's an incredibly hard row. I'm sure you've all already read this, but I did the cover story of the current National Review, and it was my assignment was to write about the headwinds that McCain has been facing, and I started with 3, and then I said, no, I think I'll write about 5, and I ended up with 10, because it's virtually impossible to follow a 2-term president of your own party anyway. It's been done once since FDR, and when that president is at 25 and 70, as Bush is, it's doubly impossible. Right track, wrong track at 1090. There's an enthusiasm gap between the parties. There's a party identification gap between the parties. There's a financial meltdown. There's the war in Iraq still happening with 4,200 dead so far. There is Obama's incredible fundraising, even if some of it comes from people with names typed randomly on the keyboards. And then there's McCain's traditional problems with the Republican base, because, in Ohio in 2004, evangelical Christians came out of the woodwork to vote for George W. Bush. And are they going to do that for John McCain this time around? I don't think so. I don't see anything that tells me that they are going to have that kind of enthusiasm. And just the last thing, I think the reason in 2004 that you saw Bush reelected was, in a larger sense, people just felt it wasn't safe enough to make that change, and now they have a different point of view.
And Clarence, and I think Byron makes excellent points as well, but Clarence, the whole question about is Barack Obama ready to be commander-in-chief? Does he have the experience to be commander-in-chief? The doubts that were raised about his Chicago connection. You're from Chicago. You write for the Chicago Tribune. The whole Bill Air.
It happened in Chicago without me knowing about it.
Yeah. but the attacks against him, the robocalls that we're hearing now about who is the real Barack Obama? And
Wolf is getting desperate here, you can tell.
He's obviously, if you look at the polls, in our latest, all of our polls, he's reassured the undecided, a lot of the undecideds. He's reassured a lot of the independents. Perhaps most dramatically, in our brand new CNN Opinion Research Corporation poll today, he's reassured older Americans. And older Americans we define as anyone over 50. Right. So they must be really old. And older Americans, 59. And you young people should pay attention to this. Politicians love older Americans much more than they love younger Americans, because older Americans vote. And that's a significant and much higher percentages. Talk a little bit about how he managed to overcome the doubts, the Chicago doubts that were raised by McCain and the Republicans.
Well, interesting strategy that Obama has had, and New Republic's got a good new piece Jason Zingerle wrote about David Axelrod, Obama's advisor, who I hasten to add was an intern under me at the Tribune in the 70s. And not that I didn't teach him everything he knows, but I'm very proud of the lad. He actually taught me everything. He was the only intern we ever had that I knew of who knew the names of not only all 50 aldermen. We do have the largest city council on the planet, but all 50 ward committeemen. Wow. Which any of you who know anything about Chicago know that's where the real power is. At 24 years old, a brilliant young man. And he has worked a number of elections of black mayors and other black candidates for office with crossover constituencies and all. The Deval Patrick, governor of Massachusetts, Mike White, former mayor of Cleveland, a number of other folks. And interesting kind of strategies he takes. For one, to see if I can remember all this, but number one, don't get into an attack campaign, even when you are attacked. which is interesting. This worked in the Philadelphia race, there, your hometown there, EJ, and in Cleveland, et cetera, because white voters don't like an angry black man. So show yourself as being quite serene and ready to just shine it on and glide through. And you notice even now, as McCain attacks Obama for his Bill Ayers connection, and by the way, I too have palled around with terrorists. I covered the Weatherman Convention back there in 1969, and have also been a neighbor to Bill Ayers and his wife. So there goes my presidential campaign. But anyway, I noticed the Obama campaign, despite urging by many people, has not made an issue out of John McCain's connections to Gordon Liddy. And those of you who are history students may have heard of something called Watergate. And Gordon Liddy, the one convict who refused to take an early out, he's so proud of his achievements in subverting the Constitution and plotting possible assassinations, that and talk about lacking contrition. Now a popular radio talk show host, which I think has now surpassed patriotism as the last refuge of a scoundrel. Anyway, the other aspects of the campaign have been aimed at enhancing Obama's credibility. And I think here he was helped by a couple of events that weren't mentioned. The debates became Obama's platform for showing credibility in much the same way that Ronald Reagan used them back in 1980 and turned his campaign around, turned his polling around. Another thing was the response to the market crash. John McCain seemed to be somewhat erratic, as Colin Powell said last Sunday on Meet the Press, suspending his campaign, although not his advertising or his surrogates, and threatening possibly not to debate. He eventually did, and proved kind of demonstrated his irrelevance during the negotiations here in D.C. to talk about the bailout plan and all. That whole episode, as well as the debates themselves, didn't help McCain's image, whereas Obama's image, although he's been attacked by conservatives for not getting engaged in that process early on. Now he looks smart to have stood back. Like McCain, he's not part of the relevant finance committees on Capitol Hill, and looked more like the guy who was taking the long view. So it is that sort of thing has really helped him, I think, to as far as credibility is concerned. But one thing Colin Powell said that Maureen Dowd wrote about today was, I think, important, that experience is helpful, but judgment is the real issue. As John McCain says, the issue is not Bill Ayers, but Obama's judgment. But that has not had the kind of saliency that McCain would like for it to have.
Celinda, there's been some confusion about what we call the Bradley effect, referring to Mayor Tom Bradley of Los Angeles when he was running for governor. The polls showed supposedly he was going to win. He lost. And people suggested, some white people, they say they're going to vote for the Democrat, but then when they go behind the closed doors of the polling booth, they change their mind, or they don't vote for the black guy. Doug Wilder in Virginia, they said the polls were wrong on that. That he in the end won and became governor, but much closer than the polls suggest. So the question to you is there such a thing as a Bradley effect? And is there that notion out there right now? Is it at all possible that these polls are wrong, and because there will be white people who say they're going to vote for Obama, but in the end won't?
Well, if you ask 10 pollsters, you get 10 different opinions. I am one of the pollsters who believes in the Bradley effect, and in our polling, we have seen it in this election. You can measure the Bradley effect. What the Bradley effect is, the best way, and we were actually the first to identify for the DNC, and Paul Tully actually, that Wilder was within margin of error, dead even in the race. The Bradley effect is in some ways a race of interviewer effect. so that whites who are talking to what they perceive to be white interviewers are several points less supportive of Barack Obama than whites who are talking to African American interviewers. In our studies, we find that people think they can determine the race of the interviewer in 45 seconds, and they're 85% right. And most of our phone banks have both black and white callers. The Bradley effect has ebbed and flowed in this election, and the closer the election and also the less that people are focused on the economy, the bigger the Bradley effect. The more they're focused on the economy, the wider the margin for Obama. Ironically, the Bradley effect. At most, it's 2 or 3 points, and in this election, Obama's ahead by far more than 2 or 3 points, probably. So
some of those key battleground states,
it could be
it's within the margin of error. If you take a look at some of the close states, 3 points, 4 points, that's within the margin of error in these state polls. Go ahead, EJ.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm a skeptic of the Bradley effect. There may be a very small one. It's not even clear there was a Bradley effect in the Bradley governor's race in 1982, that there was one poll that did show a big Bradley lead, but there were other polls that showed it much, much closer, so that there may have been an exaggeration. Secondly, it's not a situation where people have to be ashamed to say, I'm for John McCain, and they can come up with a lot of different reasons to be for John McCain, even if the reason is race. And for example, a lot of people said the Bradley effect was working in the New Hampshire primary. I think that's nonsense, and that, as I guess Celinda does too, that I think a lot of things happen to shift that in Hillary Clinton's direction, the debate, Obama's comment, you're likable enough, and also a lot of people up in New Hampshire in both parties think that Obama's huge lead in the polls actually hurt him, because there were a lot of independents who liked both Obama and McCain and decided to vote for McCain in the Republican primary because they figured Obama would win. So maybe there's a little bit among the independents, maybe there are some people in the independents who will end up drifting to McCain, but I think, we've talked about how in this climate, Obama should have a much bigger lead, at least until now, than he had. And I think some of that came from a race effect that was...
Charles, what's the true answer?
I think EJ is right about the Bradley election itself. There was actually a gun control measure on the ballot, which brought out a huge number of undercounted gun owners, and I think the samples that had been originally counted on in projecting a big Bradley win had vastly undercounted social conservatives. So I'm not sure it existed even in that campaign. Secondly, to the extent that there is a Bradley effect, you can interpret it as white racists who won't admit it and who secretly vote against the black guy on Election Day, or you can say that it's a measure not of white racism, but of white political correctness. You could have people who, for perfectly legitimate reasons, think Obama is a risk. He's young, he's untested, it's a dangerous world, I don't want to have him there, but when you get a call and you live in a milieu in which you really want to see an African American elected, as a lot of Americans do, you sort of, you don't want to admit it in public. So it's a measure of what you think is expected rather than any racism. In the end, you vote against him, but not because of his race, on the grounds of other reasons. And I think that the sort of interest in the Bradley effect, of bringing it up, is part of a larger thing happening in the mainstream media, which is, it's probably less relevant now that Obama looks as if he's going to win big. But say a month or so ago, where it looked as if the race was a toss-up, perhaps even McCain was ahead, preparing liberals and Democrats for a defeat and blaming it on white racism or other nefarious causes, like a dirty campaign on behalf of McCain, the illegitimate bringing up of William Ayers and other such issues. So it's sort of preparing the ground for a defeat, and also implying, and I think in a rather subtle way, that if you vote against Obama, and if you fall for any of these so-called underhanded tactics by McCain, you're somehow acting in an un-American or even in a racist way. I think this has been by historical standards, a pretty clean campaign, and I think it is a calumny against McCain that he has been accused actually in advance of stoking racism. A Newsweek cover a few months ago, which was a disgrace, in which it said, just as the Republicans have used race since 1968, you can be sure that that the fear of the other and other such dark implications are going to be erased by McCain. He did not. And you had Obama himself was saying about a month ago that they are going to tell you that I'm unlike them. I have a funny name. I'm not like the face on the dollar bill, essentially preemptively accusing McCain of racism. He, in fact, has been extremely scrupulous. And, in fact, I think what is a perfectly legitimate issue, Obama's long association with a racist Reverend Jeremiah Wright, he has entirely eschewed out of a sense of honor, and because he's afraid it might, even though it's a legitimate issue, stir embers of racism. And I think he's to be commended. Instead, he's been pilloried in the press for running this sort of underhanded, subtly racist campaign. I think it's exactly the opposite, and I think he ought to get the credit he deserves. I would have raised Jeremiah Wright long ago. He did not. He does not, and he probably will not. And I think that's a testament to his sense of honor in this campaign.
I'm going to get to Clarence in a second, but let me let Byron weigh in.
Well, I think there's a flip side to this Bradley business, which is black turnout. As you saw it in South Carolina, I think it was Obama only got about 78% of the black vote, and then it just goes, after that, it just goes up 90 and above everywhere else. And I'm just pulling these out of my head, but I think blacks were 10% of the 105 million people who voted in 2000. I think they were 11% of the 120 million people who voted in 2004. And they could easily be 12% of a much larger number this time. So, I think they were 88% for Kerry, 90% for Gore, maybe 94, 95 this time. Whatever, if there is a Bradley effect, there's also this effect on the other side, which is higher black turnout, an even higher percentage of blacks voting for the Democratic candidate, and that could make a difference, certainly in Virginia. If Obama wins Virginia, it's going to be because of that. So
North Carolina.
And North Carolina, which is definitely in play. So there is a flip side to that.
Clarence, is there such a thing as a Bradley effect?
Well, I don't think this election is going to settle it. Just as it's not settled now, because like Celinda said, you could, and believe me, I've gone over it. I'll tell you, I've got my personal page principle, which is that just based on the sense of gloom, doom, and foreboding that I naturally have as an African American and a Cubs fan, I believe that, especially after New Hampshire, the last time I had some irrational exuberance in this campaign after Obama did so well in Iowa. I love Iowa, but the black population went up 25% when I stepped into the state. And the fact that Obama did so well there, I don't care what party you're in, you had to stop and say, hey, things have changed. After 40 some odd years after the vote. We're at this state right now. And that's number one. Number two, I think it's going to be very hard for pollsters to separate how much does race hurt Obama compared to how much age hurts McCain.
That's right.
Age is a big factor there. I've heard many people talking about it, and I get phone calls from people asking legitimately, think he can really handle the job at his age and blah blah blah.
You can speak about that much more openly.
Yeah, you can certainly speak about it more openly. A third thing, and this is something I'd love to get Celinda's reaction on. Andy Kohut and I were talking about this. That he, going back to when he was working for John Lindsay in New York, that as a young pollster, he found that the Bradley effect, so to speak, doesn't come from people lying to pollsters, but just not responding. They don't pick up the exit poll. They say no thank you when they're asked, would you survey? And that tends to be where that hidden anti-black candidate vote tends to be, and that there is an effect that conservatives tend to refuse to be polled more often than liberals do. I see you nodding your head there.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that. But I don't ask me why, but it's an interesting phenomenon. And the third thing, let me put a good word for McCain. I love the pre-candidate McCain, the old John McCain before he went into battle mode. And the same thing happened to him that happened to another really nice man, Bob Dole, back in *96, who turned into this grouchy grump and trying to be the ideological warrior, which was not a natural role for him to play. And now McCain is trying the same thing. It just doesn't seem that natural for him. I think that we need to separate, in as much as Obama's remarks about the dollar bill faces was interpreted as a shot at McCain. It should not have been. But I think it's very legitimate to say that people out there who are McCain supporters will play the race card, just as Bush supporters played the race card against McCain down in South Carolina in 2000, which his daughter has yet to vote. Well, she wouldn't vote for Bush in 2004 as a result of what happened down there. And it's also just yesterday I heard Davis, McCain's campaign manager, told Hugh Hewitt, a well-known talk radio host, don't hold that against him, and blogger, that he expected Reverend Wright to be brought up here in this campaign before it's over. And I also remember Harvey Gantt in North Carolina, who on the last weekend suddenly out came the TV ads with the white hands crumpling up this letter and a voiceover saying, "You wanted that job, but they had to give it to a minority." Harvey Gantt supports Teddy Kennedy's affirmative action quota bill, blah, blah, blah. You know that.
Let's let Charles go ahead.
Go right
and
ahead.
move to a different subject. And I also want all of you
I do want us not to canonize John McCain on this subject, by the way, because I think that yes, I like the old John McCain too, by the way, but, they're now running around saying that Obama's tax cut amounts to welfare because it's refundable. Welfare is a loaded word. The Palin talk about pro-American parts of the country, the repeated use of the word terrorist in the Bill Ayers ads aren't just about Obama's judgment about Bill Ayers. They get that word in play. And every day, somebody from the McCain campaign keeps saying, well, we haven't brought up Jeremiah Wright. Did you hear that? Jeremiah Wright. So that, I respect
Jeremiah Wright,
up
to
a
point
for what he's done, but, let's not canonize it.
You forgot the word socialist, as well as, Obama's even been accused of being a celebrity.
Go ahead, Charles.
So much error, so little time. The search for racial code words is unending and really quite extraordinary. Socialism is not a racist code word, nor is welfare, nor is terrorist. Bill Ayers is a terrorist, an unrepentant terrorist. To call him anything else out of a politeness is an excess of politeness. So it's a perfectly legitimate issue. Jeremiah Wright is not a guy that conservatives have gone around, uncovered and discovered and sprung on Barack Obama. Barack Obama is the man who brought him out into the American consciousness in his books. He talked about him as an extraordinary influence on his life. He married him. He was in his church 20 years. I think McCain is a fool, an honorable fool, but still a fool for not having brought it up out of a sense of scrupulousness. It is an extremely troubling issue that Obama has never explained adequately. His speech in Philadelphia was a fraud. It was essentially retracted 6 weeks later after his reverend spoke. Not in was undeniable and out there, and he eventually broke with him. But McCain has been extraordinarily scrupulous. There was a talk show host who introduced him, I think, 3 months ago and said, to Barack Hussein Obama, and when McCain heard about it, he excoriated this guy to such an extent that the guy withdrew his endorsement of McCain. That is John McCain. Let me add one more thing. I like the nostalgia that my friends here have for the old John McCain. Let me explain to you folks who are young and innocent that when a Democrat praises a Republican, what they're saying is, this is the old John McCain. They loved him when he was poking a finger in the eye of George Bush, making alliances with Democrats, and essentially being a maverick against his own Republican majority. But now that he actually possibly stands in the way of a Democratic restoration, all of a sudden he's a new guy. I have news for you guys. He's not a new guy. He's the same man who was a prisoner of war 40 years ago, the same guy who's been in the Senate 20 years, 30 years. He's the guy he was in 2000 and the guy he is today. But he's now standing in the way of a Democratic nirvana, and that's why all of a sudden it's been discovered that he's had a personality transplant.
All right, I'm
a psychiatrist. I can tell
Charles,
you,
he wasn't going on calling
happen at a
people
late age.
socialists, everything else.
Hold on.
He wasn't going around calling people names and all that. He was much more of a conciliatory than he is now.
He wasn't in the general election before.
Exactly. It's a very unnatural role for him, and he doesn't really play it well.
Here's the point, and I'm going to open this up to your questions. You see these two microphones over here. So if you guys want to stand up and ask a question, go to the microphone. One at a time. But shh, quiet on the set. But Charles, I think the points you make are excellent points, as they always are, and all of us know that Charles is one of the most brilliant journalists
Sounds
out
like
there.
a setup, Wolf.
You got it.
But
I always tell my students, pay no attention to the words before the but.
all right. But here's the question: Would the old John McCain or the new John McCain, let's assume he's the same John McCain that you just described, the John McCain that we saw at the Al Smith dinner the other night in New York, who delivered a beautiful statement about Barack Obama and the historic importance of a black man potentially coming into the White House, given the history of black people being denied entry into a White House. It was a very eloquent, moving statement. If you didn't see it, you should take a look at it. All of that is true. But would the John McCain that all of us know, if he hadn't changed, had picked Sarah Palin to be his running mate instead of a Joe Lieberman or a Mitt Romney?
Well, he wanted Lieberman, and the party said no, so he wasn't going to have a floor fight at the convention. I think it's perfectly in character. John McCain is a gambler. He lost 3 airplanes under his control in his lifetime, and lived to talk about it. It's not a guy who doesn't risk things, and he's had that all his life. He's taken tremendous risk. He's a guy who staked his career on the surge at a time when, if you all remember, it was unbelievably unpopular. He was out there all alone. He had no support even among the Republicans, and he risked his future on what he thought was right. With Palin, he thought he needed a game changer. And he decided he would go for someone who would electrify his base, as she did, and who might have appeal to crossover Democrats, Reagan and Republicans, particularly Clinton supporters. And he chose an untested, a person who I think is not ready to be president. On the other hand, if I had to choose between having in the presidency Sarah Palin or Joe Biden, it would be an easy choice. I'd rather have someone who doesn't know a lot, but who can learn, rather than somebody who thinks he knows everything and has been wrong consistently for 20 years. Knowledge is acquirable. Intelligence is not. So if you want to have a debate over a Palin versus Biden, I'd be happy to have it. It was a long shot. I think she came out untested in her first encounters with the major media. But I'm not. I thought, as I wrote very early, it was probably a political mistake. I think it'll turn out to be. But it's not out of good character, and it's not the outrage that many in the media and among the liberal intelligentsia have pretended it is.
All right. Let's take a question. Go ahead.
Okay. I respectfully disagree with the panel on some of the best things that Obama has going for him in this campaign. And I say this with some trepidation because I don't want this not to happen next time at this. But I think in what I have seen, the greatest asset Barack Obama has is the most biased media I have seen in an election cycle in my lifetime.
You're a young man.
That doesn't tell me that doesn't give me much hope.
Hey.
But I would just add-
this is your century. I'm just walking around in it, you know. But believe me, you got a lot to see.
A young man, but very wise.
Thank you. I have one specific question, and it goes to the Bill Ayers issue. And I think the McCain campaign has been wrong when they said this is about judgment for associating with him. The issue is about ideology. It's about what does Barack Obama believe about the economic system. And I just want to point one thing that was in National Review today by Andrew McCarthy. And it talked about how Ayers and Obama, when they were sitting on this Annenberg Challenge board, funneled $2 million to someone named Mike Klonsky, who was an unabashed communist at a party called the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist. And he was involved in educating children. Now, my question, and I wish McCain asked it, why does Barack Obama think it's acceptable to be funneling these types of people to be educating children? And I just wonder why no media outlet has done a real investigation of what Barack Obama has done on that panel. And what
Are you sure no media outlet has done an investigation?
I don't think any of the major...
Have you talked to any of the Chicago media?
Excuse me?
You talked to any of the Chicago media? Since that is a Chicago operation?
Well, but not the national media hasn't. It's a national issue.
Just asking.
Well, I'm saying it's a national issue now, and they haven't done it.
We have a website you can access. We have a very
Once again,
large... I invite you to.
Look, he's right in
Hold on. Go ahead. We know the National Review.
Yeah, they have.
As far as hold on one second.
He just said that no media have investigated.
Well, the National Review, we know the National Review has done a lot of reporting on it.
I know they have. That's why I'm asking him about that, because I know a lot of the reporting has been wrong and distorted.
ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, Newsweek Time. That's
Right, and that's what I'm referring to as well. These media, I mean, it just kind of bugs me when people say, well, the media haven't done this and haven't done that. How do you know? I mean, I've been working at this for about 40 years now. We investigate a lot of stories. Number one, we knock down a lot of stories that are wrong, like Mr. Kurtz over at National Review has done a lot of distorted reporting on Obama and Annenberg, et cetera. There are a number of stories that we're working on right now. There's a lot of stories that we have already got on our website. I was on talk radio here with Dionne Ream's show. Guy calls and says, why aren't the media talking about Obama's background with blah, blah, blah? And I said, well, if you go to our website, we have a whole section on Obama, more than you ever want to know. And the guy says, I don't want to read any websites. I want to know what Obama's policy is on this. So, you know, you can lead people information that can make them think.
He's right in the sense that Ayers is an indisputably bad guy who is, by his own feeling, continuing the revolution by other means. And I do wonder. I mean, you made a little joke about hanging out with terrorists. Yeah. I don't know anybody who's ever on the FBI 10 most wanted list, but this is a man who writes, guilty as hell, free as a bird, it's a great country. This is not good, and it seems odd that just, is it because his father was the chairman of Commonwealth Edison, or is it, the Gordon Liddy thing, Gordon Liddy, I believe, did go to jail, and he served his sentence.
And he's uncontrite.
Whatever you think. Well, no, he went to jail, and he served his sentence. He didn't.
And so did Bill Ayers, went to court.
He went to court, and they charged him for job because of prosecutorial misconduct, I believe.
Which we could talk about as well.
I suppose you could. But
I suppose we could.
Listen, are you defending him?
I'm defending him because...
Really, why?
I'm defending him against the distortions. Look, I covered the Weatherman Convention.
What have I distorted?
Okay, I covered the Weatherman Convention. I thought their beliefs were whacked out then. They're whacked out now, but he is not contrite for it. If you read his whole book, by the way, it is full of regret. But he does not, as he makes these cockamamie statements, in my view, about how, well, I don't think we did enough. Well, of course, Bill O'Reilly is going to interpret that as meaning, I wish I had thrown a bomb at the UN too, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the guy's got his own way of thinking, but I covered this guy as an SDS member. I covered him as a returned fugitive. I covered him as an education reformer. Now, we can argue about his ideas, but he is nationally recognized as an education reformer. He got a Man of the Year award from Mayor Daley. This Mayor Daley.
Clarence,
Elder Mayor Daley.
Can
I just finish?
We're talking about his actions.
His actions were 40 years ago.
An unrepentant terrorist who
like
said
I say, Gordon Liddy's unrepentant as well.
This is called
one at a
This is
time.
called Refighting the 60s. I commend you to Andrew Sullivan's interview with Barack
Have
on
you
the Atlantic
instituted a
website,
statute of
where he
limitations
talks
on
about
murder?
all of us who
One
won't
at a
let the
time,
60s die.
All right,
That's why nobody
Charles-
cares, ladies and gentlemen. It's just
Charles,
the
and then
boomers that
EJ.
care about this.
Charles and EJ, then we're going to move on, but go ahead.
Clarence has just promulgated a statute of limitations on terrorism. I don't know if that's in the law books, or perhaps it is, but I haven't, or perhaps it's
What
in
about the
Chicago.
IRA guy that Bush met with?
This is a man who not only was in the weather, and who cares about his ideas? It's who they killed and what they did and what they bombed. And the fact that in 2001, on September 11th, in the morning of that, in the newspaper, the New York Times, he said that he regretted he hadn't done it enough. This is an unrepentant murderer. I would not sit in a room with him. I would not shake hands with him. And there are a lot of Americans who believe that is so. You're saying that we're refighting the 60s? It's a legitimate issue as to whether or not he bombed when Obama was 8-year-old is irrelevant. It's that Obama knew him as an adult. He knew what he had done, and he knew he was unrepentant, and he thought it was okay to be in his presence. I and a lot of other Americans think that is a disgrace.
Well, that's fine. Everybody tell their opinion.
But it's a legitimate issue.
My colleague Steve Chapman agrees with you about Ayers. He also agrees with me about Liddy, and he's written as such. You know, like I said, we can refight the 60s forever, but I think one of the reasons why Obama is so popular with younger boomers, those people between the baby boomers and Gen X, is that he's talking about now and not talking about 40 years ago.
All right, EJ, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to address the gentleman's question. I actually just straight up disagree with you respectfully. I think that the media have, in fact, gone out of their way, in many cases, to create false balance because they're afraid of being accused of being biased against the right. A good example, I saw it, I may have been on CNN, where they were going after, they did a tough story on that outrageous McCain ad that said that Barack Obama wanted to teach kindergartners about sex before he wanted to teach them how to read. And then they found some issue ad that Obama did where you could debate what he said, but there was no equivalence between what McCain said in that ad and the other ad. And time after time, I think what you're seeing is the media are actually much more likely, they were really slow, and that's why I honored Charles, to raise a lot of fundamental questions about Palin. So there was some talk about her as a mother, which I always thought was irrelevant. I thought liberals should stay away from that issue and wrote as such, but her qualifications. So I don't think that the media that you listed is biased. The cover of Newsweek, how will Obama lead a center-right country? I don't believe this is a center-right country. I think built into that story is a conservative bias. John Meacham, the guy who wrote, is a great writer. He can write that, but it doesn't prove that the media is biased in favor of McCain. So I think everybody's bent over backwards for McCain in this election.
EJ, Palin, I think, was rolled out on a Friday, and there was a Troopergate story in the Washington Post on Saturday, and a Troopergate story on the front page of the Washington Post on Sunday. I don't think they were slow to jump in on this. I just would also point, to go to websites, the Pew Center for Excellence in Journalism has a new study today which says that since the conventions, the number of positive stories about Obama have outnumbered the number of negative stories, and with McCain, the number of negative stories have outnumbered the positive stories 3-1. So by whatever measure they're using, it certainly fits with my impression of things. I don't think you could say...
4 years ago, by the way, between Kerry and Bush?
No.
Well, I think you should.
Well,
because we were getting complaints 4 years ago about how we were biased in favor of Bush.
If you're just going to say complaints, you get complaints going back as far as you want.
Well, I say the same thing about content analysis.
It's a reason
about content analysis stories, because I'll debate them today long, because it depends on how do you rate a story pro.
But the New York Times also had a front page story about Bill Ayers. And
all right, guys, Celinda is going to say something, and then we're going to take the next question. Go ahead, Celinda.
We were just having a good fight.
Yeah, there was a break.
I enjoyed that fight a lot, and I must say I don't think the worst thing that could happen to children is being taught by communists, and personally I think an unrepentant murderer is probably George Bush, so what do I know? The one thing I would say is that the whole reason I think that Obama is winning, actually, is that he didn't let himself get dragged into this stuff. And what real people are worried about, honestly, and what your parents are worried about and what you're worried about is how you can pay for your college tuition, what just happened to their 401k. or your neighbor's house is being foreclosed on. And honestly, these things that probably would be disqualifying in other years, voters even get mad that they're being raised. And that's why they're not having any impact. And it backfires to raise them. And actually the press's ratings, and I think the press is excellent, represented by all these journalists, even the ones I disagree with. But the press's ratings are at an all-time low, too, because voters think this stuff is getting way too much attention. And far more important is, what are you going to do about the economy? What are you going to do about health care? How are we going to get out of Iraq? And that's what voters are voting on, not any of this stuff.
What are some of the things that might be disqualifying in another year without all of these conditions?
Harris probably would have been problematic in another year, I think. And I think that, McCain's affairs, if they existed, might have been disqualifying another year. How he treated his first wife might have been disqualifying. I mean, honestly, the voters are applying this standard pretty much to both sides, but the Obama campaign never tried it. But there are pretty nasty personal ads that could have been done, and distortions probably that could have been done against both these guys, and I don't think it would have worked against either one of them, because I think the voters are like, enough. Rome is burning here, and I really don't care who he was fiddling with. I want to know what you're going to do to get this fire out.
All right, go ahead.
Two things on my mind were Ron Paul and mentioning the other candidate's patriotism. The patriotism issue might be a little redundant since you all talked about it, so feel free to discuss Ron Paul if you like. But just quickly, I'd like to suggest that whether you're Democrat or Republican, if you believe that your opponent is beholden to special interests or is motivated more by mere personal ambition than some sort of political altruism, or if you believe that they follow a fringe ideology, then why should it be taboo to question their patriotism? Aren't these three phenomena, for example, indicative of someone who believes in something other than the best interest of their country, or however you want to define being a patriot? So do you think it's a proper taboo to question the other guy's patriotism, or do you think that could be legitimate in some circumstances? And if you like, would you comment on the Ron Paul revolution? Thank you.
I think we have a Ron Paul supporter on.
No, my roommate is.
Are there any other Ron Paul supporters here? Is there anybody who supports Ron Paul? There are. Well, when you went to the primaries...
Is it fair, Byron, I'll paraphrase the question, to question Barack Obama's patriotism?
I was going to talk about Ron Paul.
Well, you could be like Sarah Palin and ignore the moderator.
That's true, yeah. Just speak directly to the American people.
That's right. Well, the whole debate over the war, which was much bigger in the spring than it is now, when one side said, your policies will lead to surrender, I want victory. I think that's perfectly legitimate. Obama actually, was it St. Louis? He had to give a speech on patriotism, I think. Am I right about this?
Yeah.
Yeah. He went out and actually gave one of these. It's kind of a smaller version of the Philadelphia race speech, because he. Why do people have doubts about his
patriotism? That was the flag lapel pin thing.
Was that the lapel pin? Yeah, that was. You're right. Which was. I mean, he came on and came off. McCain never wears one, by the way, which is I kind of admire. But look, I don't think that you should come out and say that this guy is un-American. No.
Anybody else have any other questions?
May I speak to that? Just
you may.
Very briefly.
Go ahead.
Michelle Bachmann is a congresswoman who last week on Chris Matthews' Hardball show got into a tirade about how the media ought to investigate Congress to weed out the un-Americanism over there. This is a congresswoman from Minnesota and a conservative Republican. I think one term when she just came in 96, or excuse me, 06. At my age, you get your decades mixed up. But after the appearance made headlines, suddenly over $1 million came flowing into her opponent, who hardly anybody knew, the night before today on the world's greatest cable network. I heard that the RNC is pulling money from her now, that she's a lost cause, just for using the Americanism tag a little too frivolously. And that's what bugs me. I got into a shouting match with a reader the other day who thought my column was anti-American. And I say, look, call me subversive, call me decadent, et cetera, but, I submitted to the draft and served proudly in this country for 21 months, protecting America from the Eskimos up at Fort Lewis, Washington. You don't call me un-American. And that's what bugs me. If people just, if you don't agree with me, you're un-American. That's what I mean by frivolous.
Go ahead.
I do want to thank you all for coming. This is awesome, I think, to have this opportunity. And also, we're all sitting on the floor here, so I know you can't see us. But we don't want to block the view. So.
Are you wrong?
No. My question is actually, this new thing that's come up in the news is about the possibility of having, when everything's said and done, a Democrat in the White House, a Democrat majority in the House, and also having a majority big enough in the Senate to block any filibuster. Is this going to come up by the McCain campaign? If it will it have an effect? If it doesn't, why won't it come up?
I think it's a good question, and let's talk about it a little bit, because the McCain campaign, until recently, really wasn't addressing this whole issue of checks and balances. Do the American people really Democrats, Nancy Pelosi in charge of the House, Harry Reid in charge of the Senate, Barack Obama in charge of the White House, the executive branch, the legislative branch, presumably with even more significant Democratic majorities in the House and Senate. Is this good for the country to have one party in control of so much? Let's let EJ, and then we'll move it on.
I was thinking that your question reminded Charles and Byron of Nightmare on Elm Street, and I was thinking of It's a Wonderful Life or something like that. I mean, it very much depends on what you think needs to happen in the country. I mean, from my point of view, what needs to be done will, in fact, be served by unified democratic government. That if you believe that we need to pass a health care plan, which I do, universal health care, that's more likely under the scenario you outlined. If you want more progressive taxation, which some see as socialism, although I don't understand McCain attacking as a socialist. I think President Bush, and I say this as a compliment, is the socialist because he's the one who's nationalized the banks. But, if you believe that you need more regulation of the financial industry, so that I think you have this opportunity that would probably be as great as you've seen maybe since the New Deal, to have quite a lot of progressive social legislation go through and a crisis which creates a sense of urgency. Obviously, if you don't believe any of those things, then this scenario is troubling. And I do expect McCain at the end to lean on this divided government argument, which I do think appeals to some voters. The Republicans used it quite effectively in 1996 to save their majority in the House when Bill Clinton, everybody knew, was going to be reelected. And divided government has a following among the American people because we don't trust power, which is not a bad instinct on our part. So I think that's how it plays out.
All right, let's let Charles weigh in.
I think I would agree that most Americans, in the abstract, like divided government because they essentially like no government. And it's better if they're at loggerheads and nothing essentially happens. I think that's the perfect kind of government, and that's what the founders had in mind. All the checks and balances sort of compounded upon each other, a bicameral legislature, three branches of government, and the party system. All of that is sort of invented as a way to prevent tyranny and also action, which I think is a good thing. But as an abstraction, I'm not sure it translates into electoral action or election there and say, I think I'm going to split it because I want to see a Republican in the White House and Democrats in the Congress. But I would add one factor to the ones you are adding. We're not only going to have, assuming Obama wins, the most liberal president in memory, and probably one of the most liberal congressional leaderships in memory. We're also going to have a very unusual set of circumstances. We're going to have a time of economic turmoil in which all the psychological and ideological barriers, this huge government intervention, have been removed, ironically, by the conservative president. What happened in the last week and a half, the Secretary of the Treasury calling in the 9 largest banks, a piece of paper in front of them and saying sign or else, is what happens in Argentina and Venezuela. In banana republics, there's usually a gun on the table. Here you don't have to have it. It was understood all of them had to sign over part of the banks, the government saying, I'm going to be your partner or else. This has not happened in American history in a long time. So and the fact that it's happened under Republicans means that it will, there is sort of a removal of the barriers against intervention. In fact, if you'd asked a liberal today whether a year ago he would ever have dreamed of having the Secretary of the Treasury having the power to buy banks essentially at the point of a gun, he would have said it was impossible. In those circumstances, imagining the Congress steering debt instruments, steering loans, steering lending in political, social, or class directions is conceivable because it would see it's a far less of an intervention than what's already happened under Republicans. So you're going to have a unified government, quite liberal, in a time of turmoil where the tools of intervention are going to be handed, ironically, from Republican administration to Democrats. I think the opportunity for the EJ's wet dream of this, forgive me, no, that was uncalled for.
It's okay, not running for office.
I wasn't in the least offended.
In the liberal nirvana, I mean, all this is now really possible. You can have New Deal-like changes in American life unlike anything any of us have seen. So I think that is a distinct possibility. If McCain can articulate that better than I can and a little bit shorter, he might have an effect on the electorate, but I doubt it can be done in a way that will make people change behavior on election day.
Because Byron, this is an argument that some of his conservative friends wanted him to make long ago, but he was reluctant to do so. I think in part because he didn't want to concede that the Republicans are about to lose a lot of Senate and House seats.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, a few weeks ago, I sent an email to Alex Castellanos, kind of a superstar Republican ad maker, sitting out working for CNN, and said, "Well, what Alex? What kind of ad would you make?" And he sent back just one short paragraph. It said, "1 car, 2 accelerators, no brake, heading toward the cliff. Is this what you want?" Maybe that would work, but I would say that the nightmare scenario for me is even worse with the idea of getting 60 Democratic votes in the Senate, because the House, they can do what they want to do. The party in charge. And in the Senate, there's a lot of talk among Republicans, has been for more than a year now, of the, quote, importance of 41, meaning having enough senators who would stick together to stop things. And if the Democrats were to win the White House and 60 votes in the Senate, just do anything they want. I think that the last time that happened in the Carter years, I think there was 61
Democrats. Wouldn't there be conservative Democrats like Ben Nelson of Nebraska, among others, who wouldn't necessarily automatically knee-jerk go along with a 60 majority filibuster-busting Democratic-led Senate?
Not automatically, but on the big things where you kind of have to go with your team, I think there's a possibility that they would.
There are also at least three Republicans I can think of. Snow, if she's
Collins,
Collins, if she's reelected, Snow and Specter, and then on particular issues, other Republicans who might go along with the Democrats.
Yeah.
Okay, it's even worse than that.
All right, this is a time when we'll have some final thoughts from our panelists, and then all of you will go back and study your torts and stuff like that. Cases. Supreme Court cases. You all know some of the Supreme Court cases, right? All right, go ahead. Celinda, give us we're going to give you each 2 minutes, final thought, and the clock is ticking.
Okay. Well, let me go back to divided government for just a 1 minute of my 2, and that is we actually did research on it, and people are very mixed about it for exactly what DJ said. They half the people want checks and balances, but half want somebody to get something done. And it doesn't generate any votes for president. It just makes people more cautious down the ticket. I would say the last thought I'll say is it's not over yet. And who turns out and how much they turn out and whose ballots get counted are going to make a big difference in this election. And I think that the turnout of young people, in particular, is the single most unpredicted, unknown thing in this election and will make the single biggest difference.
Good. Excellent summation. Jay.
I agree it's a mistake to see this as over, just because I do see this John McCain strategy as having this very narrow opportunity to work. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but I think it's possible. And I think that we are going to have one of the most amazing election days. In fact, Election Day has already started. I think one of the signs of where this might be going is how many, in all the states except Pennsylvania, Democrats are voting about 2-to-1, going out to vote early by a ratio about 2-to-1 to the Republicans. That's a sign of where things are going. I think you will see a record mobilization of African Americans. And just to underscore something Byron said, I was looking at Andy Kohut's numbers. In the October poll, October 9 to 12, John McCain was getting 1% of the African American vote, and in the recent poll, he doubled it to 2%. So there is going to be both a large mobilization and a very strong
But that survey has
vote.
an error, plus or minus 3.
Oh, yeah, right.
So they could go 101% for Obama.
The only prediction I'll make is it goes to what Wolf said at the very beginning, which is that a lot of people are skeptical about the youth vote, and I think it's going to materialize in substantial numbers, not necessarily at exactly the ratios of the most settled people in the electorate. The youth vote has been going up since 2004. There was a youth mobilization in 2004, happened again in 2006, it happened again in the primaries. So some people are very cynical about young voters. I am not. And that's pandering to this audience, but it's honest pandering.
Well, whether it's over or not, I sure as hell want it to be. I am exhausted. The Canadians had an election 2 weeks ago. It lasted 37 days. Now, that's a civilized country. What I personally have been put through is truly outrageous. 22 months of having to watch and to follow I don't know how many debates, election night speeches, and obfuscations. It's quite an ordeal, and I'm glad it's almost over. I heard Britt Hume, our host on Fox News, on the radio the other day saying, I used to say, the more news, I take it back. I've had enough. All I want to end with is to say that even though some of you might have guessed which way I'm going to vote on November 4th, and try to disguise it, but not that well. If what I think happens, and Obama is elected, and I do think he is untested and unready. Somebody has said that this is an election between a man who should have been elected 8 years ago against a man who should be elected 8 years from now. If he I think it'll be a tough time for our country, but I will say one thing. I will be extremely proud of America, the fact that an African American has become president. It's a testament to the resilience and the moral integrity of this country that have gone in one generation, which I have seen, from segregation to an African American president. And in that way, it'll be a great day for America, and it'll be a solace for those of us like Byron and I, who will be in sackcloth and ashes otherwise.
Well, I can only... damn it, Charles, it's one of those nights where I find myself agreeing with you. How'd that happen?
I know the pain.
Yeah, I know, yes, it is, yeah. That's why I say, believe me, like I say, you're a young man, but much to witness. I decided I wanted to get into journalism back in 1964 when I was in high school with watching the conventions on TV that year. Little did I know that was the last year the conventions would really conduct actual business before they would become infomercials. But I wanted to be an eyewitness of history. I wasn't expecting to witness this much. As we enter the last days, I think it's going to be kind of like that vice presidential debate, seeing which vice presidential candidate will make the fewest gaffes between now and Election Day. We have Joe Biden announcing a possible terror attack if his own head of the ticket wins. And we have today Sarah Palin, besides her wardrobe selections now being a matter of public record and party funding, she has expanded the powers of the vice presidency in the Constitution. That's a law school joke, but it's actually true. All I can do is reiterate, with my usual sense of African American doom and foreboding, watch the final weekend and see what happens there, because that's when the get out the vote activities really go in earnest. And that is also the time that candidates show their true mettle. And I think it was Walter Mondale, EJ, Mr. Historian, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was I remember one candidate who said that they were advised when all look, conduct yourself in a manner that you want to be remembered by your grandchildren, right? Yeah, with Mondale. Right. And I'll never forget that, because now when people show them their true selves when they're really up against the wall, and now Don McCain is known for the Hail Mary pass, and as Charles mentioned, he went after Bill Ayers but didn't go after Reverend Wright, now is the time to see. I think I think John McCain really is basically a good man, and I might have been more disposed toward him were it not for the fact that I think that Barack Obama is better qualified for these times, but. It is something that I'm really basically fundamentally optimistic about my country and about the future and about your generation, and that's my view of Americanism.
I think I'm one of these people.
I wasn't trying, but thank you. I appreciate it.
So this means you want McCain to suspend his campaign in the last weekend, right? I'm one of these people who thinks that I don't think voters depend on issues that much to make their final decision, and I think when they go in the voting booth, I think the question about Obama will be, do I know this guy? And I'm not exactly sure where that comes down, but the reason they do it is because you never know what you're electing this guy for. Now, all everyone can think about is this economic meltdown. A few months ago, all we could think about was the price of gas, which is oil, I think, is at $66 a barrel today, down from $147 a little while back. And then the war before that, even though the war goes on, it's much smaller down the list of priorities. And in the 2000 election, the burning issue was what were we going to do with our fantastic surplus.
That's right.
So my friend David Frum, who was a former Bush speechwriter, says, who was in the White House in September 11th, says, you elect this president, you've had this big debate on the issues, and this guy's got the best health care plan, and you elect him, and he gets into office, and a month later an enormous meteor hits the Midwest, and it immediately becomes the meteor presidency. And so you don't know what you're electing this person for. And so whether Obama can pass that test, I don't know, but I have a sense that decision has not quite been made by most voters.
Let's give everybody a round of applause. All right, and with that note, I'll leave you with this thought. First of all, thanks to Georgetown Law School, one of the excellent law schools in the United States. Let's go. But since I'm here and I'm the host of the Situation Room, all of you right now are in the Situation Room. Thank you very much.
Nobody been a chicken dinner with anybody else tonight, though.
That was fun.
Good work as usual. Nobody been a chicken dinner over predictions tonight. Great job.
Well, EJ, I'll be very depressed if I look brilliant if my weird path works.
Well, no, I don't think it will be. But I'm holding you.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm holding you personally responsible for all the details of the new Deal.
I'm sorry?
I'm holding you personally responsible for the new Deal.
Oh, okay.
It's on your shoulders now. You take it away. I'm going into opposition.
It's funny, your analysis and mine were identical. It really was.